What up, guys? Another Adonis review. Today I will be doing Gran Turismo 7 and with PSVR 2 version of it, I guess. Also using a steering wheel and pedals or whatever you want to call it version of it. So can kind of give you a mindset of if you should get it, depending on your likes in the world and what's so on and how it works and all that fun stuff. So first, to start off, I will go into my general outlook on driving games. I personally am not a giant fan of them. The only driving games I've really played that I actually really like were like Need for Speed Heat and Underground. Basically, I've kind of realized within myself that if I'm going to play one, I kind of like the ones where it's like an open map, kind of like Fast and Furious, old school street racing in the city type of vibe, or, you know, like I like the Heat a lot because you basically were in like a giant open version of Miami, as well as kind of like the outskirts, farm areas of Miami to change up the map. And, you know, they base the tracks off of that. I've never been really one that likes kind of like straightforward one like track fucking laps, or ones that really heavily look like they are pre-made laps. This is kind of like a middle ground. I mean, it's definitely not an open world city that you can follow in. It definitely does kind of have, as you can see, areas that are kind of worldly, which is what I look for. But they also do put a lot of heavy things that kind of make it into like, where it's not like you're just racing in the world. It looks like you're definitely racing in a, you know, world, I don't know, system. I don't know the name for it. So it's definitely in the middle. But with that being said, obviously the main appeal of this, why you would get it if you weren't a racy person, is the fact that you can do this in VR. And I will say that this is pretty nicely equipped for that division. The graphics are phenomenal, which makes obviously racing in VR very cool. And the second biggest thing that makes this pretty awesome, beyond the fact that it's VR, is the car list is fucking insane. I mean, I think I'm just gonna guess, but I would say there's 200 more cars in this. And every time I play a new racing game throughout the years, when I see like whatever the new cars that have came out, like it feels like I have a mindset of cars that from like 2010, where I don't know what futuristic cars look like. And that's the coolest thing about this game, is they show you cars that like are just beyond the spectrum of what you probably think exists in the world, and past that. And not only that, but you can also drive those cars in virtual reality. So it kind of gives you the ability to drive these cars is that you probably would never drive in real life, and kind of almost feels like you're in that car while you have the VR helmet on, which is pretty sick. It really kind of adds that extra oomph, is the fact that they do have so many different versions of cars. Because this would be pretty neat if they just had, you know, like 50 cars and you could drive, you know, even a Lamborghini in it, and it's like, oh, that's cool. But the fact that you have such a giant variety of cars definitely adds to it. But anyways, going on to it, kind of highlight the main positives and the negatives. So main positives in getting this, like I said, graphics look great. If you're going to drive in a game and hoping it looks realistic in VR, this definitely does, you know, exactly what you'd hope. It's a top of the line game if it wasn't in VR graphically, and it is. Like I said, secondly, you do have an insane list of cars. I mean, you could drive a DeLorean, you could drive the shittiest of shit cars, or you could drive classic cars, you could drive expensive cars, you could drive, you know, multiple years of Ferraris, and Lamborghinis, and McLarens, and just all sorts of interesting cars. So the variety is amazing. I guess the kind of negatives would go into the fact that it's not an open world racing type of game, which is a shame. but it does have a good variety of maps. With that being said, that kind of give you forest or desert or raceways and all that stuff. That's okay. I'm not a giant fan of the type of kind of the stale or the stiffness of the driving. I feel like it is kind of tough, and it kind of makes it's not a clear, easy way to kind of like win. It's not sometimes just based on like having a fast car and driving better. Like sometimes it seems like there's a giant things holding you back. Another negative would be the fact that some cars you can't get without getting like a fucking ticket or an invitation to buy the car, which I think is fucking ridiculous. With the fact that some cars are so expensive, there's so many of them. And it's like just getting, the cars that you want and getting enough money to buy them all. If like could literally take you fucking, months. So the fact that you have to wait for an invitation to buy a car that could be a car you really want, because it's limited. I like creating like a limit to how many cars there are in a fucking inventory, so you can't buy unless you get an invitation. I think it's kind of stupid. I mean, so far it hasn't really affected me personally in the game, but I don't know. I just imagine how that'll be once it does finally affect me personally. That's kind of a bummer. But I mean, beyond that, everything else plays out pretty smoothly. I guess another negative I could really say would be there are some really cool futuristic cars, which I guess they just made up. I guess they're called the VGT cars or something like that. And I guess some of them, they don't actually even create a VR. So I guess another cool thing, I guess to kind of further explain what I'm about to explain, is that you can, while looking at cars, go into something called a VR showroom. So you can, before buying a car, kind of like virtual reality, put yourself inside the car and look around it to see if you want to buy it, which is a cool way to kind of use the VR if you don't have that car yet, because like I said, it could take you a while to get a whole bunch of cars to so many. That's pretty neat. But there are some cars that don't have like a seat. You'll try to go to the VR showroom and sit down in them, but you can't. The reason you can't is because there is no fucking shuttle for you to do it. So if you try to use that car in a race, because you buy it because it's fucking cool, and then you can't use it with VR. You can, you're basically just like a floating head above the car. It's weird. A floating head above the car, because they never made a fucking cockpit for it. So like you could use that car, normally if you're not playing in VR, but if you use it in VR, you don't get the cockpit because they didn't create one for it. I don't even know what the point of that was. I don't know why they wouldn't do it. That's kind of a weird negative that I didn't really know. And I bought a car that looked sick because I was excited to drive it and see what the cockpit looked like. And then I started driving and I was just like floating above it in the race. And I was like, this is weird. Like, why would they do that? And I found out that's just how some cars are. Luckily, if you do a VR showroom for a car before you buy it, and it doesn't show you a cockpit, you'll know that's going to be like that. But I don't know. I just thought it was a mess or whatever. So I was like, whatever. Like I'll see it when I buy it. And then it wasn't there, and I learned the hard way, unfortunately. So that's just a thing to be said. Another thing is you can buy a full setup for it, steering wheel, pedal, and whatnot. I ended up buying that because I thought it would be a cool experience, but I kind of did a makeshift one because if you didn't know this and you were also considering buying that shit's expensive. I mean, to get even, if you just generally look it up, to get steering wheel, pedals, and like a seat and shit, like just on the basic kind of price for it, it's typically between around $300. Like that's just like the average for it. You can get pedal and steering wheel alone for maybe around $100 on the cheaper end, but you kind of need those things. Like I had to buy even like a desk and like a chair or whatever specifically just to kind of even slightly have a setup that kind of worked, because unless you have something that kind of already fits that, it's tough to just make without all the necessary things. So literally setting that up could be very expensive, but once you do set it up, it is kind of cool, but I don't feel like it adds the type of immersion or whatever that I was hoping. But maybe it's because I didn't go all in on a fucking like $700 setup. But it does do it enough to where it is kind of neat, but definitely not worth it if you're just a person who's just sticking their toe in the water. Maybe they're only buying it because this isn't VR2, which is what I think is fucking ridiculous. It truly is an expensive price for someone who is all in. If they love fucking racing games and fucking they were gonna buy it no matter what, and fucking then VR is just a fucking the cherry on top. You know, that's like basically the price of it. It's not meant for people, you know, like me, who's like, oh, like this is kind of neat. I'd like to play this, and this would make it a little bit better. But I don't necessarily like racing games. There's no price for something like that, really. You either go all in or you don't go all in, which is kind of the bummer. So, if you are thinking of also getting that, you know, you're not big of a racing game, you only do because of the VR, you're going to be kind of astonished of the pricing. Like I said, it's not an easy thing to cheaply go into. But with that being said, I enjoyed it a lot too without the steering wheel. It's not that big of a difference in my opinion, you know. So I think you can enjoy it in VR too without that and still have a pretty neat experience. Cool driving in the cockpit and looking around and seeing people next to you, be able to look in the rear view mirror and see them behind you and all that shit. So it is really cool, and I think it's worth it all the way. The move controls don't work for it though, so if you don't have a steering wheel, you're going to need to just use like a normal PS5 controller or whatever. That's kind of a bummer. I wish they somehow adapted the move controllers into it. I don't know. But beyond that, all around, they do add a good amount of races that you can kind of get put into. They have kind of like I wouldn't say it's like a story mode. It's kind of like a Grand Prix, but they have like a sort of like mission list as well beyond like the story that you kind of get of like the racing battles. But you also get these weird kind of like specific challenges where you have to maybe start in last place and beat a bunch of cars to get the first place in one lap, or you know, beat someone in a drag race, or you know, just different things that you get different missions on that kind of change up the variety. And then even once you get past all the normal stuff, you get extra kind of challenges that will add, like you have to, you know, stop and refuel gas, you know, like twice a race to fucking get to the finish line, which, you know, just makes it a little bit more difficult and adds a little bit more variety, or tires will get fucking worn out and you have to replace it in the cockpit, whatever it's called. So they do give you a pretty wide variety as long as, you know, multiplayer and other shit that kind of keeps you occupied. So they do give you a lot of stuff to do with this VR and all that stuff. So luckily you don't just, you know, get burnt out after fucking, you know, 25 hours of a story mode and then ending it. So I do feel like you get a bang for your buck and you get a bunch of different activities to keep you playing for a while. So you will have that playtime there. I think you can get into it if you're not a giant racing game person, but I think if you are hoping to get everything, to really get that feel, get the steering wheel and all that shit, it will be very pricey for someone who just wants to try it out. It not be worth it for you, so just something to keep in mind. Overall, I think it's a pretty cool thing to get, especially for the VR, to kind of add that variety. Those were, you know, again, you can get the game for like $50, I'd wait maybe $30, but you get it for a normal price and get that kind of feeling, and I think it's worth it. I think it's definitely one of the higher up games that you can get for the VR too, so I think it's worth it if you got that money to spare to play it. So I hope that gives you some general mindset on it. Later, guys.